All right. Now, when you think about your skin, a lot of people can think about being on the beach, catching some rays, and feeling the sun on your skin and how good that feels, right? Imagine yourself being on a beach right now and just like, oh, it feels so good. And also, you know what things I love too is that, especially if you're in like a Caribbean tropical location, that island breeze that comes onto your skin and you just feel how amazing that feels. Now, there's a lot more that happens that goes on with that, but our skin is severely underrated and only thought of really in an aesthetic aspect of things. But there's so much more that meets the eye when we're talking about the skin. One, it's our largest organ in our body, and it's one of the best organs in terms of understanding what's going on in the inside. Our skin health tells you so much about what's happening inside our body and on the outside. And this is often done through skin health in terms of discoloration of skin, bruising of skin, things like that. Often tell a story that's never told unless we start looking at our skin first. So, our skin is an initial first line of defense for our overall health and well being. So, let's look at more functions of skin thermal regulation, right? So, the homeostatic regulation of body temperature. So, skin basically provides a canvas or liberating aspect for sweat, for the surface, for sweat to come up to the surface, to cool our body down, and it adjusting the flow of blood in the dermis as well for there. So skin is actually a great vehicle as a cooling mechanism. It's funny, I was teaching a class today, a weight training 2 class, and in this class we were doing peripheral heart rate training, and this is where there's a very heavy cardiovascular load. And so you're keeping your heart rate high while doing some exercises that have some resistance training element to it. And one of my students, she gets really red in the face when she works out. She's a fairly new exerciser. And what that is, it's an interesting thing, seeing the redness in her face, the vasodilation happening in the skin and the pores, and that retention of heat, right? So when you start sweating, it's your body's response, your thermoregulatory response to the heat buildup. And as you build up that heat, you see that redness in someone's face. The sweating process begins to try to cool the body down. It's the AC system for that. So that thermoregulation is really important when it comes to that. Other aspects to skin are being a blood reservoir. So the dermis houses an extensive network of blood vessels that carry 8 to 12% of total blood flow. And I mean, you would notice this if you get cut. You see blood is just everywhere, right? There's so much blood lurking at the surface there. There's also a protection mechanism. So keratin protects the underlying tissues from microbes, abrasions, heat, chemicals. And you also have lipids released in the skin that inhibit evaporation of water from the surface, guarding against dehydration. And so these are just some extra things: excretion and absorption for your skin. There's sweat loss. And think about it this way: a sedentary person loses 200 milliliters of sweat per day. Now, if you're someone who's in much better condition, the thing changes. And what interesting thing is that when you're in better condition, when you're exercising regularly, you actually are much more efficient. Your skin is more efficient, but your thermoregulatory system is more efficient. So remember I talked about the person who was really red? You're trapping a lot of heat in your body, causing you potentially to overheat, and we see that in our skin. But when you exercise regularly, you actually start sweating much quicker. Your body becomes a better mechanism for getting rid of heat. So a wonderful training effect of exercise is getting rid of sweat much quicker than if you were sedentary for that. Additionally, with our skin, we have synthesis of vitamin D. So we're going to be talking about that coming up here because that's a pretty important component when looking at what's happening in our bodies and with our skin. So vitamin D is essentially a group of fat-soluble molecules responsible for increasing intestinal absorption, calcium, magnesium, phosphate, right? Vitamin D is a really important aspect when it comes to that. So the synthesis of vitamin D is a process in which vitamin D is produced when UV rays convert cholesterol onto the skin into calciferol. Okay, so think about it. It's the process which vitamin D is produced when UV rays convert cholesterol in the skin into calciferol. So getting that vitamin D is critically important. We know that sun exposure is really important, but how we take care of our skin is also a critically important step. We have to be very, very careful about our skin exposure to sunshine, right? So we need that UV light, but the protective process of that, protecting from skin damage, is also really important as well. So it's kind of a interesting dichotomy, because on one hand, you need that UV light and for the vitamin D, but on the other hand, too much sun exposure causes damage to the skin, which could lead to other issues going on as well. So really important that obviously we're synthesizing vitamin D, but we're also being careful about what happens when we have too much. I used to live in the Pacific Northwest, where sun is not often. Actually, I lived there for 5 years, and it was really difficult, actually, when it got to winter time. Right around October, the weather starts changing. It starts getting gray. And a buddy of mine always says the big dark is starting to come. And it gets darker earlier, like way early. And you just don't see the sun that often. And you get this drizzly rain regularly. So we always had a UV light lamp there to get that vitamin D source during the winter, because you just don't see the sun that often. And you need that vitamin D exposure for that. So really important. So basically the process is that you have UV light, right, which then gets converted, calciferol, and then it's processed, right, into calcitrol, and then processes in the kidneys, the liver, to convert this into a hormone, that calcitrol, which aids in the absorption of calcium in the GI tract system there. So this is just a little bit about the actual process of what happens with this. So some other connections, clinical connections to vitamin D levels. Your recommended daily intake of vitamin D is 400 to 800 IU per day, or 10 to 20 micrograms. Some studies may suggest you may need more, but you may need to supplement this as well. Again, depending on where you live, geography is a big part of it. But you can reach pretty much your needs for vitamin D within about 5 to 10 minutes of sun exposure, like direct sunlight exposure each day. But again, I would always recommend that you're using a mineralized sunscreen, not the ones with chemicals, mineralized sunscreen, to help protect your skin from UV rays. Again, we have this kind of this dichotomous relationship where you definitely need to have vitamin D, and you need that direct sunlight exposure, but too much direct sunlight exposure causes skin damage. So you should wear sunblock every single day. I wear it every single day. This mineralized one that serves as a lotion as well. It's really amazing because protecting your skin is the first line of defense in protecting the rest of your body. So having a skincare routine is actually really critically important, not only for having vitamin D, but protection from UV exposure on a prolonged basis for that. It's also possible to obtain vitamin D from nutritional practices, whether it's from eggs, mushrooms, salmon, sardines. Again, if you are not a meat eater like myself, I'm a vegetarian, I practice vegetarianism, I have to obtain this in different ways. But if you are eating meat or eating seafood, you're going to have easier ways to get this for yourself. So again, depending on your nutritional practices, that will change as well for that. Other aspects to our skin would be like superficial wound healing or epidermal wound healing. This occurs when superficial wounds only affect the epidermis, more the top layer here. So in response to an epidermal injury, basal cells of the epidermis surrounding the wound break contact with the basement membrane. These cells then enlarge and migrate across the wound, okay? The cells from either side of the injury migrate towards each other. You probably notice this with swelling, right, when you see that, which is a big part of that. So, again, with that swelling you're seeing, it helps to kind of block off that area. And, again, this is fairly obvious when you see swelling occurring on the skin. Again, the skin gives us a sign of what's happening, right? So we have like 4 cardinal signs that happen that you'll see. And of redness, right? Redness is a big part of it. Swelling, Heat is a part of that as well. Again, the discoloration, all these things are part of understanding something is happening inside of our body that is not keeping us in homeostasis. And so looking for those signs, the redness, the swelling, the heat, all those different things are indications that something is wrong for that. So let's talk about deep wound healing. Now, when we talk about deep wound healing, you're probably used to hearing about this and also seeing it in terms of what's happening on the surface level. But what's happening below the surface is really what's understanding what's happening in your body. So in this inflammatory phase, a blood clot forms. This forms in the wound and kind of loosely unites the wound edges. Inflammation is essentially just a response. It's a walling off mechanism. It's essentially like a in your body quarantine. And what that does is just to eliminate microbes, foreign materials, dying tissue, things like that. It's a walling off so it doesn't get worse for that. Then we have a migratory phase where the blood clot becomes a scab. I'm sure you've all seen this. And kind of a gross thing. Remember when people pick at their scab? You don't want to do that. You want to let that process continue. So the epithelial cells migrate beneath the scab to start bridging that wound, right? And they start synthesizing the scar tissue. Then the proliferative phase, this is an extension of growth of epithelial cells beneath the scab. And then your maturation phase is when the scab falls off because the epidermis is restored to its natural thickness that it's normally occupying there. So that's a big part of that there. Again, think about this with skin damage. You're going through this process quite a bit that is preventable by taking care of your skin. So some big things to think about with the skin, kind of rehashing this, is that your skin is an incredibly vital and important organ, but it's often just seen as a skin surface situation. But what's happening underneath your skin is an incredible, miraculous system that is helping you to heal, be a reservoir, and also being an indicator of something happening inside your body. So if you start seeing a lot of redness, if you start seeing inflammation, feels hot, all these different things are related to problems that are occurring within your skin. And so one of the best things you can do is just take care of your skin. And that starts with sunblock every day. Even if you don't think you're in sun that much, just even a decent amount of sun could cause a lot of sun damage. So having a skincare routine is really important when it comes to taking care of your skin. It's the only skin you have, so taking care of it's got to be a priority. All right, thanks everyone.